The next question we will answer is dissonance universal, that experience of psychological tension? Do all cultures experience it? Research has shown that although it may be universal across cultures, it's aroused by different situations. For instance, one study showed that Euro-Canadians who represent more independent cultures had cognitive dissonance that resulted from threats to how people see themselves. So when there were discrepancies between how they saw themselves and behaviors, attitudes, or feelings about themselves, that's when they experienced cognitive dissonance. Asian Canadians in this same study tended to experience more cognitive dissonance when there was a threat to how they thought they were perceived by other people. So that's more of an interdependent kind of reaction. So Euro-Canadians experience more dissonance when they're making a decision, a choice for themselves also than for a friend. So they're more concerned about making the wrong choice if they're making a choice about themselves than if they were making a choice for a friend. Asian Canadians experience more dissonance when they're making a choice for others than when they compared to when they were making a choice for themselves. So they were more concerned with making the wrong choice for someone else than they were for themselves. The Asian Canadians also were more likely to have dissonance when they were primed with thoughts of how other people might view their choices of behavior. And that was reflected in this study by Kitayama and colleagues in 2004. So in this study, participants chose between, the task was to choose between two CDs under one of two conditions. The first condition was people were exposed to this large, prominent poster that they were told was just part of a different research study. They were told it didn't have anything to do with theirs. So it shows, it's just kind of a mock poster showing different faces on it, and it was used to prime the participants for having the experience that there are social others there. Group 2 had no poster. Same task, no poster. The Japanese people, they had both Japanese and Americans in this study, different groups, and the Japanese tended to show more dissonance than Americans in group 1 than in the control condition. So when this poster was prominently displayed and they could see these faces, even though they're very sketchy faces, they tended to have more dissonance and doing something, making a choice between these CDs than the control group of Japanese people that did not have any poster at all. And the Americans showed slightly less dissonance in the poster condition compared to Americans in the control condition. So it actually had an opposite or no effect for the Americans. They didn't seem to be influenced by this priming at all. Another theory that challenges some of the assumptions of cognitive dissonance theory is called self-perception theory. And this theory states that people come to know their own attitudes simply by looking at their own behavior in the context in which it occurred and then inferring what their attitudes must be from that. So with this theory, it's not a matter of looking within, or it's more about looking without, outside at their own behaviors, kind of being a third person observer of their own behavior and then coming to know their attitudes as a result. Self-perception theory suggests a very different interpretation, therefore, of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance theory argues that people change their attitudes when they experience this unpleasant psychological tension state. But self-perception argues that that doesn't have to even happen. There doesn't have to be an unpleasant mental state, that's not needed as an explanation of people's attitudes. So instead of changing their attitudes, self-perception theory argues that they inferred their attitudes from the behavior that they were in and the situation that they were in. For instance, I told them that the task was fun. This was an explanation of the spool study where they had to turn the spool a fourth of an inch. I told them that the task was fun, so it must have been fun because there wasn't any other reason to say it was. So the difference seems to be about whether or not there's arousal or not. The role of an unpleasant arousal or dissonance is really the critical feature of cognitive dissonance theory. If there's no tension state there, then we have to explain attitude more through self-perception theory. Dissonance or arousal is more likely to occur if the individual has a strong pre-existing attitude, and that attitude is important to their sense of self, their self-concept. If the inconsistency is threatening to the self, then dissonance tends to be aroused. So if you have a strong attitude or a belief and your behavior is at odds with that, then that substantial research evidence does show that individuals tend, under those conditions, to experience cognitive dissonance. Self-perception theory might come more into play when our attitudes are either weak or ambiguous. Maybe we haven't thought about an issue before, and we have no prior strong attitude either way, no sense of consistency, no dissonance, and we don't identify personally with the attitude or belief. And a lot of attitudes are relatively weak and changeable. We can't be knowledgeable and have attitudes and beliefs about every single issue. We're going to last talk about terror management theory, and you have a discussion question about this. Terror management theory, or TMT, is a theory that people deal with, people are aware of, and maybe the only species that's aware of the fact that they will only be on this earth for a time. So an awareness of death is kind of at the heart of terror management theory. The terror part of terror management theory doesn't have to do with outside warring agencies. It has to do with the terror or the fear of death. One way to deal with the anxiety produced by thinking about one's own life ending is to strive for a symbolic type of immortality through preserving valued cultural worldviews and believing that they've lived up to their standards. So perhaps I won't be able to continue to live on after death, but some of the organizations that I belong to, my family, my children, my grandchildren, the associations that I have with friends and their families, certainly I can live on in them in a sense. So the idea here is to view the self as connected to a broader culture, even a worldview and different social institutions. We find that people that are experiencing this terror management in regard to their own death tend to have a stronger identification with their family, country, and religion, and any organizations that they are associated with. They tend to also have a high self-esteem and view themselves as a good, valued member of the culture. So with this view of the self, that's really, they're thinking that although they will die, the world that they know and are connected to will live on. In order to study TMT, social psychologists have used mortality salience manipulations to prime participants to have that sense of that awareness of mortality. So one way would be, for instance, having people write about death or read information about death or show them images that are associated with death, and then comparing their subsequent behavior and choices with control groups that may be primed for something different, like feeling the pain of going to a dentist. And we'll look at one such study here in a minute. Studies have shown that in Iran, participants endorsed more radical negative statements about the U.S. after they went through a mortality salience manipulation in a lab setting. And these were some of the effects. They tended to have more commitment, and this is the same conclusions from other similar studies in TMT. Individuals tend to have more commitment to the groups they already belong to and more hostility to competing groups. Increased hostility to people who criticize their own country. So a spike in patriotism. More punitive to people who challenge the prevailing laws. A couple of other effects on mortality salience are that the participants have more of a reluctance to use cultural artifacts for mundane purposes, like, for instance, wearing a flag as clothing. Also more acceptance of positive feedback about the self. So this relates to that increase in self-esteem that we were talking about a few frames back. Now, an interesting study on terror management theory is written about in your book. During the 2004 election, mortality salience, priming people for that sense of mortality, made people feel actually more favorable towards Bush during that election period than they were towards Kerry. And that might have been because Bush was already president and he was seen as defending the country from outside threats. Here are the results from that study. So the study was made up of two groups: a control group that was primed to experience, to consider the experience of dental pain, and a mortality salience group where people were primed to be aware of their own mortality. So you can look at the control group and their support for John Kerry in that condition and compare that with their support ratings for Kerry when mortality salience was in place. So you can see that there's a significant drop in their support. When we look at George Bush's performance in the control group, not that much support, but when we compare that to the mortality salience group, it went up, spiked quite high. This is likely to be explained by the fact that Bush was already president and was already seen as defending the country. And also, it's interesting to note that public support for Bush tended to go up during his office whenever the threat of terror went up. So I encourage you to apply TMT to some of the current events going on and include that in your discussions this week.